the traditional with the psychedelic medicine. He's a co-founder of Palo Santo Ventures, and in 2022 they received around 50 million. Was that something?
Yeah.
50 million.
Give or take 50.
Yeah, give or take 50 million.
Yeah.
Okay, 49 million, something like that.
Yeah.
But to get invested in companies or startups focused on creating this new era of psychedelic treatment, therapeutic treatment. His expertise lies in the intersection of finance, science, and compassionate care. And like I mentioned, he's one of the thought leaders in this evolving scape of the psychedelic medicine. Let's please bring with a round of applause to Daniel Goldberg.
So, over 5 years ago, I was at the height of my dysfunction as an entrepreneur. I was on the verge of burnout in all areas, massive dysfunction, socially, economically, behaviorally, in all of my relationships. I was at my wit's end of what to do, and I was launching my 5th company. I was trying everything I could think of. I was trying yoga, meditation, sobriety, and it wasn't until I heard a podcast with this man, Rick Doblin, on I think Joe Rogan and Aubrey Marcus, and he was talking about MAPS and MDMA therapy, and I was like, this sounds like something that could really, really help me. And right after that, I had a friend who was MAPS trained offer to do a session with me for free, and it changed my life. And I would not be here today if it wasn't for Rick Doblin and the work that he has done. Thank you so much, Rick. He is the founder of MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. He has done so much to influence the psychedelic market that we're in. We would not be where we were at almost federally legalization. We're in phase 3 of clinical trials, the 3rd phase, and that's all because of the work that he's done. So we're finished with that.
We're done with phase 30, yeah.
Amazing. Wow. We're here, guys. We're here. We're about to be legalized because of Rick Doblin. Thank you. You're my hero.
Okay, let's get into psychedelic business now. Nice. First of all, thank you so much. This is going to be, like Olivia mentioned, this is a dream come true for many of us to have these 3 people here. Like I mentioned, they are not only advocating for psychedelic treatment, but they are taking action to get all of this legalized, and not only that, but to make it all accessible for anyone who wants to take care of their own individual mental health and subsequently their human optimization. Right? So let's start now. Here we go. I would like to start asking each one of you. In the case of Daniel, what is a psychedelic experience that brought you to this point? Because otherwise we would not have had this, right? So let's ask that one. What is?
Yeah, is that good? Is that the right distance? Yeah. I don't know, when I go to concerts, the rock stars are always doing this. I don't know if it's right. That's a good question. It's one that I usually don't start with anymore because as this business, as our business evolves, I've been coached by very important people, namely my wife, to be like, don't start with your personal story. We don't need to hear all about like taking drugs, you know? But this looks like a good crowd to do that with. So, I was very professional. I have a background in, VC, private equity, and that's a very easy way, I guess, when you're coming into this field to get labeled as some finance bro that's coming in to like ruin the world and like, take over with capital and the profit motive. But I think what's beautiful about this space is when I got into it, I found that there were a lot of people like me, which is good and bad, that got into it because of a personal experience, which was roughly 5 or 6 years ago. Whenever Michael Pollan's book came out, it was pretty much right when it came out. And your job is tough. You two have a tough job because I'm known to talk too much. These two as well. I just met Sue, Rick, so I say that with love.
You know the thing that we have.
But 5 years ago, in a tough time, insert kind of like midlife crisis, like marriage stuff, all that stuff there. Psychedelics saved my life story, but it's true. And I was very lucky to find an underground guide that was very ethical, very well trained. Happens that later on I learned that the people who trained him weren't ethical, and I realized how lucky I got to get someone great, which is another reason why it's kind of we kind of romanticize the underground. It's very important. They do incredible work, but there's also a level of risk and danger with an unregulated market, and we recognize that. So anyways, I had an incredible guide. I had my first experience was with MDMA. I had no prior experience. I was not exactly a prude or anything. I smoked weed, and I'm trying to sound really cool. I'm like the dad. I smoke weed, but I didn't do any drugs, and real drugs. And I read all about it. I did tons of research. I got pretty obsessed, and I was very lucky to find someone. And I'm from Chicago. It's not like Boulder or hey, pal, yeah. There you go. One, yeah. Anyone here from? And there's not a big ecosystem there. People, I'm not in Boulder or San Francisco or Brooklyn. Felt very underground and very scary, and I was not telling anyone, and it was use signal and all this stuff. And that MDMA experience changed my entire life. And it wasn't all easy, right? That experience was, but it changed everything. And about and I won't go into all the other experiences for the next 2 years. Very lucky, by the way, to have started Palo Santo 2 years after my first experience. I do believe that when you're going through that kind of a process, a major change like that, if I had gone out and started Palo Santo, then Tim and I would have been, my partner Tim Schlitt would have been the evangelist that get blamed for the magic pill and it's going to change everything. We didn't feel that way. We felt like there were challenges in the experience and in the space by the time we started Palo Santo. But I was lucky to meet Michael Pollan at the Horizons. You remember the one? It was 2000. The one when he came, and I got into the Maps part. I didn't know what Maps was. I didn't know what Rick Doblin was. There's a lot of people maybe not here, but in Chicago, or I don't know what Rick Doblin is. It's superstar, and it was just such a fascinating story to go to a conference and see everyone rowing the boat in the same direction. People in the psychedelic business may laugh at that now because there's all kinds of controversy and all kinds of drama, but if you zoom out, it's still rowing the boat. And if you really zoom out, it's rowing the boat in the same direction. It was really beautiful. Met a lot of scientists, a lot of, Julie Holland runs that Horizons conference, and today she's on our scientific advisory board. So, it was 2 years of exploring and working and developing relationships. And I'll be honest, there was Tim and I, my partner's amazing talent, understands the science really well. And we recruited, when COVID hit, everyone's depressed, this is starting to come out that everyone's talking about mental health, and we just decided to do it. And I was like, well, maybe we could raise 5 or 10 million because it's psychedelics, that's pretty crazy. And what we found was that our strategy was very different than other funds. We were focusing on the science. We were unapologetic about the biotech route, and we'll talk more about that later. Unapologetic about going through the FDA at a time when it was either or, if you're not supporting Oregon, whatever. And we had incredible talent. Chuck Nichols, his dad's David Nichols. You can look up all these people who joined our team. Julie Holland came on board. And I remember Michael Pollan, he emailed me, he's like, wow. He's like, this is pretty interesting. Let's get on the phone. And that's when the imposter syndrome started. And I realized, oh shit, what do we got going on here? And then I didn't really see my kids for 4 years, and it's a big drama. And we raised $50 million. But no, we have an incredible portfolio now that has really survived what is a major shakeout. And let's get into that later. But that's my story. And I am very, very serious that I'm not supposed to say that it's a magic pill, it'll save your life, but MDMA is uniquely suited, I think, for a first-time experience. Someone like myself, who's a neurotic Jew, who if he gave me mushrooms, I probably would have gone to some really dark place and been I'm out. And so that MDMA was, I had the breakthrough experience that if you read any reports of a trial that would kind of mirror that. And there's some danger in becoming an evangelist after that. Danger, look at you, evangelist. Anyways, I'll move on. That's
Still out of jail.
Thank you, Daniel.
Did you cut me off? Peter Vitale cut me off. Yeah.
Thank you. Sue, what is one of your experiences?
Sure. I started as a really conservative primary care doc, and I began learning from our military veterans that were in my practice about how they were using psychedelics and cannabis to treat a myriad of illnesses. And I was super skeptical because I've been trained in indoctrinated in the medical profession where we don't believe anything is medicine unless it's FDA approved. So I had a really hard time wrapping my head around this, but eventually the stories became so compelling from family, and then I was fortunate enough to get plucked out by MAPS to become their principal investigator on their cannabis trials, and that really helped me understand the very clever ways that our government has systematically impeded research on Schedule I drugs, whether it's cannabis or psychedelics. They've created all kinds of really difficult obstacles, and what I've learned from Rick is how to persevere, how to navigate over these and get to that finish line where you can finally do the studies. But I have to admit that being able to fight with the government is almost as entertaining as doing the trials, because we've made it really hard on them, and we've learned not just taking people to, patients to Congress and arguing, but also litigating has been super successful. And as Olivia mentioned, we were able to break through. We were able to topple over a 53-year-old monopoly at University of Mississippi. That's what really was the most upsetting thing, was that our studies were forced to use this shitty weed from the government, and it was so diluted, and it never performed well in our trials. So we made really strong arguments in federal court, and it's great to live in a country where we can sue our own government and win, and we were able to, it's awesome. We were able to get our own manufacturing license, so now we grow our own cannabis, but we also, as she said, we grow our own psilocybin mushrooms, manufacture LSD, and we just got drug codes for peyote and mescaline now. So we're about to rescue 300 plants that were threatened with incineration by the DEA. So we're really excited about this, because even though we sued the DEA and the DOJ and the Attorney General, we still have a great rapport with them, and I think they view us as the opportunity for them to change the narrative with the public, because I think the public perceives them, rightly so, as decades of harassing, innocent people, and all kind of abuse of power. And now they want to show that they're working collaboratively with scientists like us. So my lawyer says that DEA views me like the furry mascot that they, parade out there. I'm like their little show pony to tell everybody how wonderful the DEA is, but it's not true. I really just, we're just trying to keep a cordial relationship with them, so they will continue to allow us to do this work. And I'll say just my other personal thing that really crystallized this for me was when my dad passed. He had a really brutal death. He had end-stage cancer, and he was full of pain and anguish and existential anxiety. And when I saw that, I made sure that my mom later, who was a physician, we even practiced together, that I made sure she saw all the data on psychedelic research that MAPS and others have produced. And she put in her living will that she wanted me, as her power of attorney, to administer psychedelics at the end of her life. And so we did a session a couple days ago about psychedelic hospice. And so when she had end-stage dementia, we were able to administer things like microdose LSD, small doses of psilocybin mushrooms, and she had the closest thing I've ever seen to a good death. And so that's what we talked about at our session, which, by the way, was almost all young people in the session, which is surprising that how many young people are aware that they need to think about this now. How are they going to take care of their parents or other loved ones? And I would say psychedelics really facilitated a good death. So now I'm a hospice doctor. I work in palliative care, trying to create change from within that system. But I think that, psychedelics are going to afford people the best opportunity to have a beautiful, transformative passing and still be able to engage in their really meaningful interaction with their loved ones. So I'm passing on to Rick.
Wow. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you so much.
Before we go on, I just want to go back to the fact that she sued the DEA and they still love her. If that doesn't take the wiles of a woman, I don't know what does. Happy International Women's Day.
Well, I will share something about Sue that I think maybe she underemphasized the amount that she enjoys the lawsuits and the fights. So that at one time, you know, we were like, when we finally got permission, it took 7 years for our first marijuana study. And it did involve all sorts of challenges to the government, but then we're like, damn, now we got to actually do the study. But it was really fun to do the fights, and so, but they're critical to doing the research. So I'll just share an experience I had when I was 21 with LSD that sort of has helped chart my direction. I'd had some LSD experiences before that were transformative, but this was my 21st birthday. My girlfriend was out of town, was out of the country actually, and so I thought, okay, I'll just take LSD by myself, and I'll have a tremendous experience for my 21st birthday. Now, my girlfriend's father was in the Air Force in World War II, and he was part of the group that dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he would have been in the third plane if there was a third bomb. And so I was at the, and he brought to meet me the guy that was in the first plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And so I was just thinking about that, and I was in Sarasota, Florida, which is 1 hour south of Tampa. And Tampa is where the Southern Command is, and there's underground bombers with nuclear weapons there. And I was just aware of this. Now this is 1974, so it's a long time ago. But all right, and back then a standard dose of LSD was like 250 micrograms. So it was a substantial amount of LSD. And it was also back in the old days when there was records, and you put a bunch of records on the turntable. So, you know how you get very absorbed in what's happening when you're doing LSD, and time can just expand. So I'm tripping, and I'm reaching the peak of this trip, and then the record ended, and there was this silence. But it's like in this silence, I sort of went into this kind of eternal space, and then I heard this sound. And it reminded me somehow of an air raid siren. And I thought, shit, I'm just turning 21 and now they're dropping the bomb. It's the Russians dropping the bomb on Tampa. And that's just where my mind went. It's not the right time of day for an air raid siren or whatever. It's I'm over, I'm dead. And you know, it's like also when you get ego death or ego dissolution, you do often confuse it with physical death. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna die. My whole life, then, what I have to do is live as much as I can in the minute or two I have before the bomb explodes. And so I went from fear, oh, fuck, I'm gonna die, to let me just be as open as I could. And so I thought, okay, what I need to do is, I was living at the end of a dead-end street. I need to just walk out the door and walk towards the bomb. So as the bomb explodes, I'll be like incinerated by the whole thing, but I'll be experiencing as much of life as I could. So I walk out down the door, and as soon as I got out the door, I was just awed by all the shades of green and all the shades for all the different trees and bushes and everything. It wasn't just like nature, it was like everything distinguished. I was just picking it up, all different, and it was just, my senses were totally wide open. And then I started hearing all the birds and the squirrels and all this stuff, and all this nature is just awesome. And then in Florida, the clouds are awesome. And so I was seeing all these things in the clouds. And I felt like I was more alive than I ever had. The fear was totally gone. It was like the joy of life. And I'm just like walking towards the bomb to end it. And I never felt as alive at that moment. And then all of a sudden, the air raid siren stopped, and I heard a guitar. And I heard a drum. And I'm like, oh fuck, was that the album? That and not the air raid siren? And I thought, man, am I stupid? But I thought, I am so relieved. Now I'm not actually dying. But once I realized that I wasn't dying, my level of consciousness went down. I couldn't sustain. It was just this, so it's this confrontation with death, and being super high on a large amount of LSD, and taking everything in, and it was just this exquisite sense of the differentiation of everything. And so that has stayed as sort of a marker in my whole life since then, recently turned 70, that was this moment of being hyper alive, and that was connected to the awareness of death and the openness of psychedelics. So that further committed me to this work, and then I'll just add, a few years after that, I had the most meaningful dream of my life, and I won't go into all of it, but I'll just say it was a Holocaust survivor who had almost been killed in the Holocaust and was miraculously saved. And I'm in the dream meeting him, and he's on a deathbed, and he's telling me that he was saved for a purpose. And at the time, he didn't know what the purpose was, but now he knows what the purpose was, and it's to tell me to study psychedelics and to try to bring back psychedelics so we can feel how we're all interconnected, and that can be the antidote to genocide, to racism, to environmental destruction. And in my mind, I thought, okay, I've already decided to do that, and so you can lay this on me, and you can die in peace. So he died in peace in front of me in the dream. And whenever it gets hard with the DEA or hard with anybody else, I'm like, it's not as hard as being in a concentration camp, and I have this mission sort of from me. So it's been the sort of driving force. After he died in front of my eyes, I went out of this room, and all of a sudden I was in nature, and there was a stream going by, and then I noticed there was this young boy sitting next to me, still in the dream, and I realized at the time, oh, I know him. This was a time where I had a large amount of LSD stash, and I was worried about getting busted. That's why I'm saying here I am 70, still out of jail. It's a sign of success. But I knew his father was a friend of mine, and he stored my LSD stash at his house, so that whenever I tripped, I would go to his house to get the LSD. And so I recognized this boy in the dream was connected to my LSD stash and LSD, and then I woke up. So it's that kind of mission of how do we bring the healing potential of psychedelics and cannabis up from the underground, and then how do we help spiritualize people? And the real mission is mass mental health and a spiritualized humanity. And this will lead us into the conflicts or the issues between commerce and nonprofits and all, is that we've had a two-track strategy. One has been drug development through the FDA, commercializing MDMA, making it into a medicine, and the other has been drug policy reform, trying to make it so these are legally available to people. The drug will cost thousands of dollars as a medicine, covered by insurance for most people, but it should also be available as $10 for people to buy the same way you go to buy alcohol, but more regulated with a license. The idea is that if you misbehave under the influence of the drug, then you lose your license for a while, and you have to get some sort of education. It should be that way for alcohol. If you're a drunk driver, you lose your driver's license, but you can still get alcohol and go into a bar and buy. So if you had a license to do drugs, so the most important thing I'm trying to say here is that we need to make it available as medicine, covered by insurance, under therapy. We need to make it available as religion, and there's numbers of psychedelic churches that are moving forward, that are really pioneering. The one that's been getting a lot of attention, Church of Ambrosia in Oakland, has 100,000 members of this church, and you just have to fill out a little membership form, and then they'll ship you mushrooms. And they're doing it totally in the open and have not been shut down. So we need it in that way, but we also need it legal, and we need honest drug education, harm reduction, treatment on demand. And I think that it will take us another decade or so to get to that point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you for your stories. That was amazing. So the topic of this panel is how we can balance mission and profit. This is a topic that's really dear to my heart, is how can we protect this beautiful movement? How can we maintain integrity in our startups as we're creating companies and needing investment? How can we stay mission focused? And at the same time generate wealth, because that's, why a lot of people are here. We need to pay the bills, and we like things, and we, like to travel, and there's lots of stuff going on there. So I have a feeling that this panel might actually have create more of a debate than the last one, because we have two opposite ends here. So this is going to be really fun. So some people believe that a strong profit motive can undermine the integrity and mission of psychedelic ventures. What are your thoughts? And just really quick, so we'll give you each just a couple of minutes, because we have so many incredible questions to ask you.
Well, I think when you say strong profit motive, I'm fine with that. It's when profit becomes the most important thing, more than the quality of the therapy to the patients. We have some of our investors, not Daniel, but some of our investors have been trying to block drug policy reform in California. We have these natural plant medicine initiatives in Oregon, psilocybin in Colorado. Now it's going to be on the ballot in Massachusetts. They're talking in California to do another one through the legislation but also to add MDMA to that. Some of our investors have been saying, don't do that, don't add MDMA to that. So I think that's where profit takes over from public benefit. And I think the key thing that we need, and this is where I had been completely mistaken. I thought that we have nonprofit MAPS. We started the for-profit public benefit pharmaceutical company, Lycos. We've just completed with Daniel's help and others, a $100 million fundraise. It is for-profit. And I thought that a public benefit corporation with the single largest shareholder being the nonprofit would be enough to find this balance that would be balancing public benefit and profit. And I think that is not what's happening. And so the step that we're at now, and Daniel, I'd love to work with you on this, is that what we need to do is articulate and quantify what do we mean by public benefit. And then we need to link stock options and bonuses to the public benefit metrics. And if we don't do that, it's going to be all about the stock price, it's going to be all about money. And I'll add one last thing that's the biggest complication in bringing these substances out from under the underground, which is how do we properly train the therapists? And the therapists are the key. It's not just the medicine. The therapists are the key, and the therapists are uniformly saying that their own experiences help them to understand what their patients are going through, help them to work through their own issues, give them this ability to be a more effective therapist. But there's no regulatory structure outside of research to give therapists what are otherwise Schedule I drugs, or even if it's a medicine, it's only for PTSD. Even if it's prescribed off-label, insurance won't cover it, the drug will be thousands of dollars. So we need a way to really fully educate therapists, and this is where I see one of the big issues at our pharma company is, do they want to just say, okay, the therapist will just get it underground or some other way? They're not as zealous as I am about arguing or challenging the FDA or the DEA to create a new regulatory context. So I see that's where you get the this kind of profit and trying to do the easy way to get it approved without trying to really fully be the best for the patients. And so there is a tension here, but on the other hand, we absolutely need the capital. It is really true. And so we were the victims of our own success in that we were able to raise about $150 million in donations, but out of that we helped create the psychedelic industry, and we showed that you can go through the FDA. The FDA is not going to block it, that you can work within a regulated context and still get great results. And then that led to all these for-profit companies, and then people who we had relied on for donations are now saying, why should I donate? Why don't I just invest? Look at all these other people that are getting a return back. And so that made it impossible for us. We didn't find the one right person that would say, yeah, I want to just make this fully public benefit. So there is this tension, but we do need the capital. And so how we find this balance is going to be really critical. And so the next 6 months of MAPS and Lycos, the pharma company, will be trying to quantify public benefit and then link it to salaries and bonuses.
Smart,
Yeah.
I'll jump into, I'll just say, for us, we're a nonprofit. We have no paid staff. We're in a really unique position where we're trying to do nonprofit drug development research to pursue federal right to try law and not FDA approval, which we're going to talk about later. But so my issue is just that I really want to work with for-profit companies. I'm seeking partnerships, but we are swarmed with for-profit entities that are sort of that are not optimal. I'll just say that unfortunately the psychedelic movement has been mired with a lot of companies that did not succeed, that emerged and looked like they would be viable. They all wanted to align with our federal licenses for credibility. They love, you have one phone call with them and suddenly you end up in their investor deck. I'm like, what? How did this happen? Or you're part of a press release for something that is completely, vaporware. So we're trying to persuade, for-profit companies to dig in and have meaningful collaborations with nonprofits like ours, so that they can align with the credibility, but not just theatrics. We want people, companies that are really going to go the distance, and we haven't found them. All the ones who've approached us over these years, luckily we've rejected all of them, and they all turned out to be just a joke, and they all went bankrupt, or just, their stocks are in the toilet.
Don't look at me when you say bankrupt. What?
So
You're pitching me here for your nonprofit. You're out. That's it. I know, I'm kidding. Sorry, I interrupted. I was probably supposed to interrupt though. Do you want to go on? You want to keep telling us how? She's right in the sense that that we're in the very early innings here of long process. I've been zooming out a bit lately. I think I've been so in the weeds. We're all very much in the weeds, and it's helpful to have people around you that can help you zoom out, because there is a lot of work in this industry. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of dynamics, very complicated dynamics. And I'm lucky to have people around me that help me zoom out. And they're like, "Look at what are you talking about? Like this is getting done." Like 5 years ago, I couldn't talk about psychedelics at the dinner table. I mean, my kids were, I have 4 boys, the 3 older ones then were like in high school, and it was like still, we weren't a just say no house, but it was like, you're talking about drugs or whatever. And, a few years later, my wife was convincing one of our kids to make sure to be explicit about his interest in psychedelics in his college application to help him get in. Like he's really interested in neuroscience. And she's like, you need to be very explicit. Use the word psychedelics. We've come a long way, and like Rick said, the 50 million or whatever that he raised through donations did launch the psychedelic industry. It may be at this point, and I believe it is, in a bit like the internet, where I'm probably I'm older than the average demographic here a little bit. I'm 85, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. I'm 51. Is that you have internet 1.0? There's going to be the MySpaces and there's going to be Facebook, and it's true that there's a lot of MySpaces out there. Probably Facebook isn't a good example because now they're like, this is the problem. I don't know if it's the profit motive or what with that stuff, but social media has its own. It's not a good drug, so it's a problem. But that's what's gonna happen. And our fund, we were lucky that we had raised enough. We got to about 30 million, and we were sick of it. You make it look easy, but it's a drag, and it's a time suck. And my partner Tim loves the science and and I said we better keep going, because the market turned, companies were failing. There was a lot of hype, but there was a lot of substance there too. Some of our companies, some of our top, we think, that kind of de-risks our fund. Companies like Gilgamesh that did get well funded, that like Jonathan Sporn surrounded himself with a team, like a real team. Journey Clinical, doing great work. I mean, these are companies these are very, very real companies. Delix Therapeutics, you can look them up. These are companies that I think will make it. They're well funded. We're in an era where not a lot of people understand what happened with psychedelics in the industry, which is there was a crash after it was really related to Ukraine. And, it was Putin, it was interest rates. That had as much of effect. People say, isn't it the FDA? Oh God, it's pushback. No. There were some dynamics in the biotech markets that really changed things. And we were lucky because our fund was big enough. We weren't fully deployed. We were probably 50% deployed. And we had some really good assets. So we put our foot on the gas, and we're supporting the companies that we think you have to say goodbye to the zeros. There were a lot of founders that didn't understand they were in the biotech business. There was some decent science, there was some good science, but they didn't understand that they were in the biotech business. And you have to get through the FDA. And that's different. That you can have the science and say, this may work, this molecule may do this, but that's very different than knowing how much the clinical trials are going to cost. It's biotech. And so, getting back to the mission versus profit, I'll just say, I'm zooming out and saying that I don't see as much of a conflict generally as I read about in the media, because I think it's an easy narrative. I think there is sometimes conflict, but I believe it's based on more the personalities and the ethics of the founders and how they put together their board. And it can change, things change, but I don't think that the incentives, like even internally, I'm not, like Mother Teresa, but even internally, I'll say, I don't care if we make a 3x or a 4x or a 5x for our investors. I just want to make an X, right? They want a fair return. And my investors invested because they want to help change the world. Some want to make money. But I'm not sitting here, driving our founders crazy with crazy term sheets. And we're saying we'll invest it in companies that are real. There were a lot of companies that weren't real. There was a lot of hype. But there are a lot of companies that are very real, and there's a lot of companies that people don't even talk about. The biggest company, probably the highest value company nobody knows in this room, I'm guessing, like GH Research. Some people, does anyone know GH? Like if I said Atai, how many know Atai and Compass Pathways? Do you guys know that? Okay, well, it's okay, good. There's a good crowd to educate. And then GH Research, nobody knows. They've got, there's things going on out there that are very interesting. And there's things, anyways, I'll pause there. I don't think it's as much of a conflict. We were donors I was a personal small donor to MAPS early on, and then we helped Lycos raise money. Lycos, and I see that as the same. I mean, different missions, but complementary.
Now, the other thing to talk about how important what the work is that Daniel's doing actually is that while we have raised 150 million in donations, that took us about 37 years to do. And in the last couple of years, there's been well over $2 billion put in from investors into various companies in the industry. So the access to capital is astronomically higher once you start switching from philanthropy to investments.
Now, talking about a little bit of, not a conflict between organizations, but let's say a conflict between the motives of the organizations within themselves. They may start with their mission and they're aligned. What is your rule of thumb to detect when an organization or a founder is going off rail?
As a founder in the psychedelic space, I would love to know that. What are some cues?
I mean, I'll tell you, this is off the cuff. First of all, everything's off the cuff today because I spent some time with Rick last night. It got a little late. And then when he went home, it got later, and I got a call at 5 in the morning from one of my kids. Scared the shit out of me. It was fine. It was a pocket dial from a party. So I'm tired, but you're here in the street. This is like a psychedelic experience where you're coming out like on ketamine, you're gonna get all the real thoughts. Probably shouldn't share. I'm gonna share some inside thoughts. Here's my rule of thumb, and I just made this up now, today. The more I hear from founders telling me that they need mission-aligned investors or that they are so ethical or that they sign this pledge or whatever, I get more suspicious. Doth the lady protest too much? If someone is doing panels on, how much they are serious about, protecting patients from sexual, in therapy from situations that could be dangerous, it ends up, recently we had a terrible headline with someone in this space and he had a terrible transgression. So the more I hear, I get a little suspicious. It's just kind of like, not always, but people are Julie Holland always says, humans are human are going to human. And so you're going to have really great founders that are, look at what, like Patagonia, it's Patagonia, right? Still well respected. It's an incredible company. Everyone thinks they're doing a great thing. No one's like, that's an evil corporation. They're probably really profitable. I guess they stuck to their mission. And there's companies like that in the psychedelic space. Then you're going to have companies that probably get crappy boards and they're going to make bad decisions. Maybe some raise drug prices and they look like a Martin Shkreli or whatever. Maybe that happens. But you're also going to have people that hopefully invent the next antibiotic for our minds or whatever, and no one's going to call that person an evil biotech profiteer. So I just think we're going to have different scenarios, and it's not going to be based on always what they're saying or how they look. There's going to be quiet ones that just create a great drug. I'm getting more cynical on the whole conscious capitalism, sorry, vibe. No, because it's just the more I hear it, those people end up not being able to perform, and they're not always effective, and they don't have the biotech experience. I don't know. Is that a little harsh?
Okay, so the two signals that I look for is what MAPS did and why we're leading the field, why we're years ahead of everybody else, why we have such great results is because the number one thing was how do we optimize patient outcomes? That's the number one thing. How do we get the best results for the patients? We didn't actually come at it from how do we get just good enough for outcomes at a lower cost for less therapy so we do get it approved and then we could make the most money. It's more what do we do to get the best outcomes? And so the concerns I have when companies are trying to say, we don't need therapists when people are depressed and they're under psilocybin or whatever. We just need, quote, psychological support. So efforts to try to minimize the role of the therapists, which of course they can think of as part of helping scale because the cost is a problem. When people are saying our therapists are, quote, psychological support, they don't even really need to have ever done the drug themselves. That's where I get really suspicious. And then the other thing on the other side, which is what helped me finally realize that I would let Lycos, the company, change their name from MAPS Public Benefit Corp to something else, because they did something, even though I'm on the board, I was outvoted, it has to do with patent policy. And this is one of the differences that you see with why do people hate pharma companies? There's a lot of different reasons, but part of it is they game the patent system to try to block generics from coming in. And so what I felt was that Lycos is seeking patents. That's what all of our biotech investors wanted. I had an anti-patent strategy to try to make none of the uses could be patented. I didn't quite realize at the time that you could patent manufacturing processes and use that to block everybody else. But I felt that we should make a good faith effort to see if a generic competitor actually infringes on whatever patent we might get before we sue them. Sounds kind of simple. However, in the US system, if you are an innovator company and there's a new generic that's coming in, what you can do is sue them for infringement, and you automatically, the FDA gives you 30 months where they block the generic from entering the market. And the only way that it can be less than 30 months is if the generic company wins the lawsuit. Now in Australia, they have a situation where if the innovator company sues the generic and loses, there is no infringement, then massive penalties are imposed on the innovator company, all the money that they made during this period when they were blocking generics. But there's nothing like that in the US. So that the pharma companies are incentivized to sue generics because they'll automatically block it. And also, the generics are going to come in, we're going to have data exclusivity, which means 5 years, because there is no patent on the uses. We successfully had an anti-patent strategy. But there is this thing called data exclusivity, which means it's different from a patent. We have our own exclusive use of our data. If somebody wanted to make MDMA into a medicine for PTSD, they could do that. They would just have to generate their own data. And so we have data exclusivity for 5 years. And then the FDA has said, and this is terrific from my point of view, is that if they do approve us for adults 18 or over for PTSD, we are required to study adolescents with PTSD. 13 to 17-year-olds, and then if that works, 7 to 12-year-olds. And you are incentivized to do that. Not only are we required, but we get an extra 6 months of data exclusivity. So that's 5.5 years. And then the FDA can only start reviewing the file from a generic manufacturer after the 5.5 years is over, and it takes them about a year to do that or so, on average, different amounts of time. So let's say we'll have 6.5 years of monopoly power. Nobody's going to do their own data with MDMA. They'll try MDMA-like drugs that they can patent, stuff like that. Because it takes many, many years also. But our investors are like, hey, 6.5 years, that's not enough. We want to sue. So I feel that was something, because when you think about this, when you figure out the price of the drug, you have a amount for how much you're helping the person, how much you're helping their families, how much you're helping society, people go back to work. So you come up with a lot of value. But on the other hand, they think, okay, when something goes generic, the price drops way down. That's also a public benefit for the generic entry into the market. Then the insurance companies can actually have more money to give to the new innovators. So when I think things are getting off track is when it's about, hey, we're going to take public benefit into account when we price the drug, but then when we try to block generics, we're only going to look at it as how much more money we'll make. So these are the tensions, and that's where I felt, okay, change the name. It's not, but it also is recognizing that I failed to raise all the money through philanthropy, and that we do have investors, and they did help propel us to get to this next step. But it's just really, if it's more about the money than about what's best for the patients, that's the big thing. And then if it's about, let's just game the legal system, that's the other.
By the way, if that's a failure, I totally want to fail. Like
Exactly.
you started the psychedelic industry. Read his whole story and went to Kennedy School.
Thank
That's
you
how
so
I
much
failed.
for having the courage to pivot when you realized that it was just going in the wrong direction and you were losing sight of the mission. That's amazing. Thank you.
I think they answered that perfect, so I'll jump in the next one.
Okay, we had a few questions for Rick that I think you kind of covered some of the stuff, and we're just running out of time here. But I really would like, Sue, for you to speak on people not giving the Native American Indians enough credit for the plant medicine.
Yes, if I can say, we just established a collaboration with the Native American Church, and they're now partnering with us on this peyote research project, and they were, asking us if we could be more sensitive and aware of the fact that, peyote is their sacrament, and they're concerned about the pharmaceutical drug development of mescaline and how that may end up pillaging a lot of their peyote supply, which is super endangered. So they do have a United Nations, like a declaration that outlines, it's easy to find online if you Google UN Declaration on Native American Rights, and it talks about their efforts to protect their medicine and make sure that it doesn't end up just in the realm of greedy for-profit drug development. So if you guys can take a look at that, and then also maybe I can touch on the right to try law. If you guys get an opportunity to look online, this is a law we're really proud of because it originated from Arizona. I sit on the board of the Goldwater Institute, who formed Right to Try about a decade ago. We pushed it into 35 states and then got it approved by the federal government. It was passed in Congress in 2018. So it's the law of our nation. It says that any patient with a life-threatening illness, not necessarily terminal illness, so could be veterans with untreated PTSD that are at risk for suicide. It could be addiction patients at risk for fatal overdose, could qualify for Right to Try. The problem is that law right now is only benefiting big pharma companies that are producing biologics and chemo agents. So what you have to do is complete a phase 1 study, and then you're automatically defined as an investigational drug. And then suddenly you are eligible to make your medicine available under Right to Try law. So it's a really important law, but it's never been proven yet to protect Schedule I drugs. But they should, our discussions with DEA suggest that they're open to allowing, to creating a pathway for us to, so for instance, once we finish our this upcoming psilocybin study, we're going to be doing the first ever clinical trial with whole natural psilocybin mushrooms instead of synthetic molecule, which is all the studies on psilocybin are on the molecule and not the real world mushroom. So once we've completed that, we would be allowed to distribute federally legal psilocybin mushrooms from our lab, and so we're really eager to make that available to the public, to gift it. It's, our mushrooms, unlike synthetic psilocybin, which costs $7,000 per gram to manufacture in a lab, our mushrooms cost pennies to make, to farm them, and we want to make them available as widely as possible because we believe this is our strategy to chip away at the Controlled Substance Act and try to break down the drug war. So please take a look at Right to Try law.
Thank you. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm signing up for her newsletter and also for Church of Ambrosia. If anyone got that one from Rick, we're gonna talk about that later. So in order to look into the future, probably Daniel is the key person right now. What are companies at Palo Santo, projects that you guys are having, you think that they're going to launch soon or that we should be aware of?
All right, well, thank you. I get to plug whatever I want to, and I will do it. I'll try to do it responsibly, but I believe that this is where we can illustrate that maybe profit and the mission for healing is all in one. I mean, we're leaning in towards what we used to call like second generation, or third generation, next generation molecules, and there's a lot of reasons. We believe that if you were listening to my colleague Adrian Joe here did a panel on MDMA. It was amazing. You get to hear all this morning at South by. and you get to hear all the incredible attributes of MDMA, which it is amazing. Like Julie Hahn will say, like you couldn't design a better drug for therapy, and it's true. But we might design drugs that get rid of some of the off-target effects. Not just MDMA, but just if you can. For example, we just made a major investment in a company, Reunion Neuroscience. And they're developing, basically it's inspired by an old Shulgin compound. Peter Vitale here in the audience, a little plug for him. He runs the foundation for the Shulgin family. If you don't know who the Shulgins are, I won't go into it. Look it up, and it's an incredible story. There's a few people that none of us, I wouldn't be here, and Rick wouldn't be here. All this stuff is Shulgins, and there's a few famous names, and Rick, and of course Michael Pollan with lit a spark that brought people like me in. But we invested in Reunion, and they're creating a drug to address postpartum depression. And it's a great example of where we think things are going. It is kind of like psychedelics 2.0. The valuation's reasonable. I mean, a little bit on the inside. The valuation's reasonable because things have gone down. It's harder to raise capital. You've got a strong biotech team. I love that they're kind of connected to the Shulgin. Like they love the psychedelic story. They're not against that. And it is a psychedelic experience. It's basically a 3.5 hour psilocybin. It's basically psilocybin like experience. I mean, it really is, and that's important. There isn't a great option out there. There are not really to a high unmet need for a very serious indication, postpartum depression, and this has a real chance. They're incredibly well funded. They're going to close with about like 70 million or something, and when a new mom is dealing with this, the idea of having a half day or a 3 hour, 4 hour, 5 hour session versus 8 hours, because this is going to be a guided experience. By the way, they're going down the road of they're going to need, obviously there's going to be a real REMS strategy, right? They're going to need trains. Wait, hold on one sec, because I know. Oh, yeah, hold on one second. I'll let you go. But that's a great example of where I think things are going, and people can be a bit skeptical of the medical, going through the FDA and the medical route, because we think of access, but a lot of our friends and family and cousins, maybe your friends and family and cousins are excited about psychedelics, but the vast majority of people are going to get their first introduction through the medical system. I met a woman a week ago in a ketamine ceremony, this group ketamine thing, and she was 61, she was suicidal, she had no interest in drugs, and she she was recommended to do the J&J nasal spray as ketamine. It was amazing to hear. 3 years ago, that was a negative when we were raising money. They're like, oh, that's ketamine, it's terrible, and J&J is gonna lose money, and it's terrible, it's the gatekeepers. And this woman, it saved her life. And now she's going to ayahuasca circles, but she didn't have the best setting for the ketamine, the nasal spray. She didn't know anything about it. She didn't have a great therapist, and it still worked. Okay, it's not the ideal, but it worked, and that's an amazing story to me because she's now changing the world, right? She's going out there. So I'll leave, and one more thing, and then I'll shut up, which is I'll just say this: I think there's a lot of skepticism around companies like Delix Therapeutics taking the psychedelic experience out of psychedelics. I could easily throw out red meat to the audience and say, first, who thinks the psychedelic experience is important? And everyone would be like, of course I do, I think, because you don't want to just take a pill. But how many people know people with cluster headaches or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or, there's skin, disorder. And Chuck Nichols and his dad, David Nichols, are working on something that's, on the anti-inflammatory properties of psychedelics. So if I told you that, you had a cousin or, someone that wants to go in and heal their pain, right? Like unnecessary. Then they don't need to have a psychedelic experience. People with schizophrenia can't right now do any psychedelic. They can't have that experience. They get screened out right now. That may change, but if there was a magic pill for that, there's no magic pill for everything, and you could solve a problem like a cluster headache without the psychedelic experience, I think we'd all sign up for that. So it's not just the mental health is what brought me into it. I think it's what we know works, but we speculate that there's some excitement around some things that aren't so controversial, right? I mean, who's going to be against that? So anyways, I'll leave it at that. We're investing a lot of it. Delix Therapeutics, Journey Clinical, give a plug for Journey, amazing. They're the only ones within this ketamine lozenge business that is providing lozenges, they're prescribers, but only to patients who are working with a licensed mental health professional. So when we look at that example of, Matthew Perry and the hot tub and all that, the bad headline, I don't know where he got it or whatever it was, but he shouldn't have. And Journey is only working with, and they're training through, Fluence and working with some amazing people to show examples out there of solving these problems. Like, you don't want to be on Instagram and have like a predatory, like, are you depressed? We'll send you ketamine. We want to have something in between, and I think that's where the ethics come in. Is that right? It's like someone like Jeff. Anyways,
so I'd like to completely agree with Daniel on this idea that we do need non-psychedelic psychedelics for a whole different range of things. The defense, DARPA, gave $26 million to Brian Roth to develop non-psychedelic psychedelics, which is great. It would have been greater if they would have given the same amount of money to us to do psychedelics, but there are a lot of potential uses for it. I do want to comment, though, on this idea of shorter is better. So this idea that, postpartum women, there's all these different ideas that, we'll develop shorter acting psilocybins or shorter acting MDMAs or milder MDMAs that we could take at home. And I'll just add that Doblin, a researcher at Johns Hopkins, has really helped transform the understanding of what's going on in the brain under this idea of neuroplasticity and critical periods. So that psychedelics do permit us to rewire our brains in different ways. And they also open up this idea, critical periods where social reward learning, where if you give it to people we've done autistic adults with social anxiety, and it helps them to be more understanding of people's emotions, more out in the open. But what Gould has shown is that the longer you're in the psychedelic state, with ibogaine being the longest one, the longer the period lasts during this period of integration where there's this neuroplasticity opportunity. So this idea, 3.5 hours for postpartum women is better than 8 hours. We intentionally give a supplemental dose after the initial dose, around 2 hours later, entirely to prolong the MDMA experience, so that people are now in this rare moment where they're able to look at their issues and to have a longer period of time. They don't feel rushed. So I just want to question, there's other people who will say, MDMA increases your blood pressure, and we've got stuff that's milder. So there's a lot of hype about, exaggerating the risks of MDMA to say we've got something new. But at the same time, I want to say that it's really important to develop what these shorter acting molecules, maybe it's even greater than MDMA for postpartum depression. We won't know till the research is done. So I think, again, if we think what's best for the patients, that means we need research in all different kind of things, and non-psychedelic psychedelics for certain kind of things. I do think the meaning that people get from the psychedelic experience is critical for a lot of the benefits, from depression, anxiety, PTSD. So that I think there are certain things where the non-psychedelic psychedelics will not have as big of an impact. And so I just really want to support all the work that you're trying to develop all alternatives, but I would say be careful with all these claims, this way it's better, that way it's better.
I agree, and the answer I would say is like, you might be right, but this drug, the reason why it's getting the funding is because the reality of the therapy hour. So they're like, the women need, they can't, they're not gonna be out all day. And also the Gould-Dolan thing, it's interesting, is some controversy, I think, when people dig into it. 5-MeO is very short acting, but it was kind of feels like, and it has an immense effect. So there are some, like, my first 5-MeO was huge, and I had, and it was 30 minutes, so whatever. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
that's
a great one. Thank you guys so much. We really, really, really loved and appreciated you having
Let's give
me
them a round of
here.
applause, please. By the way, the purpose of this panel was also to create curiosity. If anyone is curious or have not heard specifically about a component or a foundation or anything, let me know, taking all notes here. I know that many of us would like to dive deeper into this, and also we invite you to reach out, connect with them afterwards.
Thank you so
Yes,
much. Thanks for
thank you.
having us.
I have a couple last things to say. Speaking of the Shulgin Foundation, I'm co-hosting a really big after party for this event. It's called Act 2. We're going to have a lot of amazing sponsors like the Shulgin Foundation and many other big names within the psychedelic community sponsoring it. It's going to be awesome. It starts at 7. It's not far from here. If you need information, come find me afterwards. And then I just want to close with a little bit about the Activation Project. I've been a psychedelic medicine practitioner for over 5 years. I've worked with cohorts of 60, 70-year-olds, stage 4 cancer, to high-achieving entrepreneurs and founders. And in my experience, what I found is that the integration is a very, very critical piece where that neuroplasticity is forming. And so the software we're developing is set to actually maximize on that neuroplasticity to help you find meaning in your experience, to be the bridge from those profound experiences into the fabric of your life. Integration for me is application, so it's applying the information that came through in these sessions to your life, changing behaviors, changing mindsets, changing your relationships with others so you can have long-term success and healing. And we're looking for more people in our team, software engineers, so if this is something you're interested in or inspired by, I'd love to talk with you afterwards. Thanks again so much for the work you do, for changing my life personally, and for so many other people's out there. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you so much, guys. Please go enjoy the rest of the activations, and we're gonna mingle along here. Thank you, guys.